had items, and I understand DNA, obviously. DNA was there when I was leaving the lab. You continue to learn. No one knows everything when you begin with. It's a continuing process, and if I would have stayed in the laboratory, and I'm still learning today, you never stop learning when you look at evidence in crime scenes.
Okay, so then what is your most recent training as it relates to crime scene reconstruction?
Well, I'm sure it would have been my time at Oakland County, if you're looking for a formal one, where I was training a firearms examiner, and you'd work on their crime scenes and participate in autopsy, evidence recovery, etc. at Oakland County would have been the last formal. I take that back. There was another wound ballistic workshop in California that I attended, which is sort of a reconstruction of Dr. Fackler put that one on. So that was the last I can recall, to be honest with you.
Can you give me any kind of time frame, though, as to when that would have been?
That would have been probably around 2000, somewhere in that range.
Okay, so you haven't had any formal training as it relates to this field since 2000?
I would agree with that, yes.
In terms of the experience that you have not worked for the state police since 2000?
92.
1992.
I retired on February 29th, 1992. I worked at Oakland County Sheriff from 99 through 2000, 2001, somewhere in that range.
And you indicated that in terms of reconstructions where...
I believe I set on hundreds of
Was
cases.
that just on firearms in general?
Firearms in general would have been. Shotguns are not all that specific or used that many times. I would have never said hundreds of times on shotgun shootings. There have been probably in the dozen range, but not hundreds.
Thank you for correcting me. So in terms of reconstructions of a crime scene, you've only done that a couple of dozen times. Is that fair to say?
No, it's not. It would be in the hundreds of times. It doesn't matter if it's a rape crime scene. You're still trying to figure out what happened and how it took place in blood spatter analysis. It doesn't have to be simply firearms to be able to reconstruct a crime scene.
I want to know specifically as it relates to shotguns, how many crime scenes have you reconstructed as it relates to a crime that was committed with a shotgun?
Never having broken it down that way in my career, I would suspect it would be maybe a couple dozen.
Do you recall the last time in terms of a year that you did this prior to reconstruction?
I can remember one in the mid-2005 or 6 where there was a 10-gauge shotgun used at a shooting scene, and I believe there was another one, but they're not all that frequent. So I would say
more frequent to have a handgun.
Handgun or a rifle would certainly be much more prevalent.
Okay, now in terms of, you indicated that you testified on a number of occasions, correct?
My testimony has been received in courts of record in excess of 400 occasions.
In terms of crime scene reconstruction with a shotgun, how many times have you testified as an expert?
Oh. I actually couldn't give you a number. I would never be able to break it down from that. It would probably be less than a dozen.
Okay. And in terms of, have you ever not been qualified when somebody has sought to have you qualified as an expert in crime scene reconstruction?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. In terms of what you do you have standards that you use to strike that? In terms of crime scene reconstruction, are there national standards that have to be followed in order to give your opinion?
I'm sure there are standards that have to be followed. I'm not familiar with what crime laboratories standards. They have changed over the years, obviously, since I've retired. So I'm unfamiliar with what standards laboratories are now required to follow, to be honest with you.
Are there any best practices that are used in your field in terms of crime scene reconstruction that you follow?
Well, you do no damage and you don't alter the evidence would be primary items, and you report the facts as they are and where they are, period.
Are there standards that are required that I could look up on the internet or anywhere that you could point me to that say, in order to be qualified as a crime scene reconstruction expert, they need to be able to have this amount of training?
There may be, I am unaware if there are.
Are there any standard practices that in order to have a legitimate opinion based on the evidence and the facts that are standard set of rules that you have to follow as the standard in the field?
I'm sure there probably are, but again, I don't
You're not
know.
aware of them?
I'm not aware that there's a specific set of rules.
Judge, I have no further questions, and my objection still stands. Oops, sorry, hang on one minute. I have nothing further.
Your Honor, I renew my motion to tender this witness as an expert in crime scene reconstruction.
All right, now notwithstanding the objection of Ms. Clark, I'll allow the testify.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Before you start. Oh, you may proceed, Ms. Clark.
Mr. Balch, I'd like you to, yes. What I'm going to first have you do is look at Exhibit 53.
May I stand up, Your Honor? Thank you.
Do you recognize what you're holding?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. It is a 500A model, and it has a serial number. I believe it's T270293. It has a pistol grip, safety mechanism, slide action. It's a 7-shot tubular magazine.
Okay.
I have seen this weapon and test fired it.
Okay. When did you said you've seen that shotgun and test fired it? When was that?
Last week.
And was I
It was
present
on the
there?
12th. Yes, you were.
All right. And Detective Sergeant Gurka present?
Yes.
All right. And we did that here in the Dearborn Heights Police Department, correct?
At the shooting range in the police department. That is correct.
All right. Can you tell us about the characteristics of that shotgun?
This is a shotgun that has an overall length in the barrel of approximately 20 inches. It has a pistol grip, and it's unusual in a manner that it has a full tubular magazine that will hold 7 2 3/4-inch cartridges. So you could actually put one in the chamber and have 7 in the tubular magazine. So you could have a capacity of 8 cartridges of 2 3/4-inch length in here. What else is unusual about the weapon is that it's a cylinder bore. And what a cylinder bore weapon means is that the diameter of the barrel, as you put the cartridge in the barrel, and the diameter of the barrel at the end is the same thing. There is no choke on this particular weapon.
What's a choke?
Choke is a restrictor that's put in the barrel, or it's an addition you can put on the barrel, and it's meant to constrict a shot pattern. In other words, if I were a duck hunter, you're going to be shooting ducks at a great distance. this weapon would never reach a duck, even though it's a 20-inch barrel with a cylinder bore, because the shot begins to spread almost immediately from coming out of this weapon. A duck hunter might use a full choke, which constricts it as much as it can, and the purpose is to hold the shot together for a longer period of time to reach out further.
So if I have this right, you just testified that this shotgun, because it doesn't have a choke, the buckshot, the pellets that are in there immediately start spreading when discharged?
There's no constriction to it, so all of them are going to begin to spread, but when you have a choke on it, it restricts that to begin with, so it forms the pattern tighter. This one does not, and it's going to be spreading almost immediately upon exiting the weapon, and it's going to spread rather dramatically. If I were to fire, would you say the shot in this particular case was a 12 gauge number 4 buck at a distance of 20 feet, the spread on this weapon would be very much and significantly larger than if I used a weapon with the same length of barrel, but it had a full choke. It would probably be half the spread.
Right, and so does that mean if the spread of the pellets, and how many pellets are in, did you have a chance to use the shells that belong to that shotgun?
The Dearborn Heights Police Department provided a box of cartridges, shotgun shells, that were recovered at the scene. These shotgun shells were of the same type of the shotgun shell that was found in the residence. It was a number 4 buck. And a number 4 buck in 12 gauge 2 3/4 is supposed to have 27, essentially 1/4 inch pellets. I chose one by random and cut it open, and it actually had 29, which surprised me. I did not expect to see that misnomer in there, and that still remains with the Dearborn Heights Police Department. But those cartridges that were provided were used for the test shots that I conducted with this firearm.
Okay, and so how many, with the number 4 buck, how many pellets, you said the one that you fired had 29, correct?
It should have 27. This one had 29 that I opened, not the one that the ones that I fired, I have no idea what was in them. The cartridge manufacturer says there's 27. It just surprised me that the only one that I opened had 29.
Okay. The other firearms examiner found a different, found more than 27 also, in the one he used. So what does that mean if there's, let's say there's approximately 27 pellets in this shot, and it comes out now without a choke? What's that? Can you show us what that's going to do?
Well, in the construction of these particular shotgun shells, they're in a plastic sleeve. And there's a buffering material, which is a polystyrene. It looks like white sand, but it's a polystyrene plastic, and it's meant to keep the pellets from rubbing up next to each other, flattening out, so that the pellets tend to remain round until they come out of the end of the gun. They'll fly truer. If they scrape along the inside of the barrel, they'll flatten out and they won't be as accurate, and they'll go off in the pattern. So as soon as the air at the end of the muzzle hits that plastic, and the buckshot pellets then begin to disperse. The plastic sleeve and the buffering agent is meant to keep the pellets intact so that they're not damaged until they leave the barrel of the firearm.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to test fire that weapon?
I
You
did.
did last week.
I did.
And can you show us what you did and the conclusion you came to after test firing the weapon?
Well, the reason I test fired the weapon was having seen the evidence, which is in court here, this screen and the screen door, and examining that first and looking at the hole in the screen door and making the assumption that after having looked at photographs of the crime scene initially, that this door was at the crime scene in a position prior to the shot being fired. I then measured that, looked at it, and conducted tests to ascertain in my mind how close the muzzle of this shotgun was, if this is the shotgun that caused the hole in the screen using the ammunition that was supplied.
At this point, I have to object because that screen has not been admitted. So if she wants to move for the admission of that screen, then I think that she needs to do that, because my initial objection to this whole testimony was that he's relying on facts, not in evidence. That screen has not been testified to by anybody, that it is in fact the screen that that was recovered from the house. So, I mean,
Your Honor, I could do it real quick. I could either you allow me to recall Detective Sergeant Gurko, who's sitting right here. I know he will say that's the screen and the frame that came from the door. We saw the pictures that have been admitted already. I can do that step and then ask for admission.
Unless Ms. Clark allows you otherwise, then you're going to have to do that.
Okay, Your Honor, then may...
it's just, fine, stipulate to the door.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, yeah, I would like to mark this as defendant's exhibit. I'm going to do, I'd like to admit Mr. Balish's CV as defendant's exhibit 1. And then I'd like the screen itself to be 2 and then the frame 3, please.
Ms. Clark, any objection?
No.
All right, so moved.
Okay, Mr. Blash. Get your last name, I mispronounce it. Your Honor, may I have permission for my witness to come down and show us what he did?
As long as he's going to talk, he needs to speak loudly so it can be recorded,
Can
okay?
I have permission to position myself so I can see what he's talking about? Thank you.
All right.
Hey, Mayor, right there.
You can stand.
Thank you. Got me on here?
Yeah, we'll have
Thank
it
you.
come down here, it's more room. And then if you need any of this before, please let us know.
Your Honor, Detective Gurko showed this. It was enclosed and sealed in a cardboard container, and he opened it in my presence and presented this as the screen that was in the door. It was
Okay,
very-
before you, can you hear him, please?
And Detective Gurko presented this as the screen that was at the residence. In reviewing the photographs of the crime scene, this was consistent with the photographs of the screen of this type at the scene. So I maybe was something that this was in fact the screen that was at the crime scene. What was important was the type of damage done to the screen in this particular area and the direction of the force that caused it. It was my opinion that the screen was in the door, and as such, it was placed that the damage to the door was at the open side. If you have a photograph that I could use that demonstrates it as a scene.
I borrow this? Thank you. Hold on, let me put it like this. Would you like a photograph of the screen
Just at the scene in the doorway.
down? Coming up, here is People's Exhibit 16.
Okay, in reviewing People's Exhibit 16, the door frame is apparent. Here's the opening mechanism of the door, and here's the screen at this location. So the screen, when you approach the residence, is in this. I'm sorry.
Do you want me to get the frame down?
Yes.
Well, we should hear him.
I'm sorry, I'd be from this side, of course.
So just for the, oh, I can just cut this thing. There we go. Just for the record, so the judge knows what we're looking at, this would be the, what is facing the judge is the inside. If I was in a house and you were on my porch, I'd be looking out like this, correct?
This is the position the screen would normally be in the door. It is not the position of the screen at the time that anybody arrived at the scene. As you can see from the photograph, the screen is out, and it's on the inside of the door, so it was positioned somewhat like this. You can see the bar that goes across near the door handle, and it's now in the same position that it is. So this is roughly the approximation of the screen in the door frame here in the courtroom as it was presented at the crime scene itself. Therefore, I made several measurements, but you're trying to get the distance from this level down to the floor. At some point in time, someone also, one of the officers, put the screen back in the door at the crime scene. Right. So the force would have been on this screen, from the inside of the screen, toward the outside. And in looking at it, this is the area that I perceive to be the center area of the hole in the screen. This hole in the screen is approximately 60 inches from the floor. If you put the screen back in the frame, this hole is now roughly 67 or 68 inches off the floor. And this calculation became important because the victim in this particular shooting was a 5'4" individual, or that individual had been 64 inches tall. If the screen were up in the door at the point in time that the shot was fired, firing at a 64-inch individual, the hole enters the screen at approximately 67 or 68 inches, so by necessity, it would have had to have been pointing downward. However, there's more that would have to be considered. When looking at the front porch, this photograph doesn't show it, but the next photograph of the front porch shows that there's a step down. So the step down is roughly 6 inches. So in essence, the victim is no longer 64 inches high. The victim is now 58 inches high. If the screen were in the door, the entry hole is at 68 inches. The victim's height standing on the porch would be roughly 58 inches. So you would have to have a dramatic downward path, and that is not the case. And when you look at it, in my opinion...
And what do you mean? I want to know if the screen, so what we're...
Yeah.
Yep, I got the frame. So let's say, and what I'm going to ask you, in your expert opinion, before the shot was fired, was the screen up intact like this, or was it down like we see in the pictures?
In my opinion, it was out of the frame of the door already.
Before the shot was fired?
And you hold this, and
Yep.
may I pick up the weapon, Your Honor? The weapon is unloaded. It's in a safe condition. Chamber is open for demonstrative purposes. I would prefer to point it this way. Could we turn the door that way, Your Honor?
Any way you want.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's nobody back there. I feel more comfortable. So, if the position of the person here holding the weapon, firing it as it is in the door frame, with this weapon, it would have to have been fired something like this to get the downward angle to hit a person that is now, instead of being 64 inches high, the person on the front porch is 6 inches lower. Now, and it's somewhat, I understand, I don't know for a fact, I'm 5'11" now, I guess I'm not quite 6 foot anymore, but I suspect the homeowner is fairly similar in height.
Judge, I have to object to that. There's been no testimony about that. That is a fact, not an evidence.
I'm saying I'm approximately 5'11" at this point in time. For me to do this, I would have to hold the weapon in this position. If it's in the frame, shooting downwards, which would result in a remarkable downward wound path in the victim unless the victim were right next to the screen looking upwards in an angle that mirrored the angle of the weapon.
How likely would that be? It sounds like the stars have to align and the person is looking up, the shotgun's just right.
I find that difficult to believe. Now if I could just take the screen out and put it down, now when you have this position, the person is still in, the person is still at this height, and it is now a much easier angle to obtain with the screen out of the door frame for a person on the inside firing the weapon to the outside.
So your conclusion after doing the accident reconstruction or the crime scene reconstruction here at the Dearborn Heights Police Department with that shotgun and with the frame and the screen, is it your expert opinion the screen was out of place and down approximately 6 to 7 inches when the shot was fired?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there anything, do you need this anymore?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Did you have a chance to review the records by the medical examiner, Dr. Keesis?
Yes, I did.
Keisha. Okay, and all right, I'm going to hand you, and it's already been admitted as People's Exhibit, a copy of the Office of the Wayne County Medical Examiner. And on that last page, there is a picture of a head in the shaded area, and it says GSW, correct?
Yes.
Gunshot wound. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I'd like to just go back to the screen being down when the shot was fired. Is there anything from the medical examiner's report that supports that conclusion, the trajectory of the bullet?
The trajectory of the pellets, according to the medical examiner, as I recall reading, was front to back, relatively straight, and somewhat from the left to the right, as I recall.
Okay.
But it's relatively a straight-in shot, as I read the report.
Okay. And that does seem consistent with the straight shot. You would hold your hand straight out?
Well, the plane of the weapon has to be somewhere, the victim has to be somewhere in line with that, and the head is a very movable object, so if you tip your head up you can look upwards, or if you're downwards, but it's such a massive wound that they were looking at. The fact is that it's a relatively straight-in shot. So
Okay. So let's say the screen was intact before the shot was fired, the medical examiner's findings wouldn't be consistent with that, would it? With the coming in?
no, the medical examiner's opinion wouldn't have anything to do with the screen being in or out. They're saying the entry of the pellets into the victim's head. What would necessitate it, the victim would then have to be looking up at somebody and be very close to the door to be able to get that angle into the head, which would be, I mean, if the head is in the position of my hand, that's a straight shot. But if the gun is up here, then if I position my hand down here, that's still a straight shot, but the head is now tipped backwards or whatever direction. So it's possible to do it with the screen in the original position. However, the position, the victim has to be much lower, and then the face has to be on the same line that the muzzle of the shotgun is.
So after reviewing the medical examiner's report, was how the pellets entered, well, I'll strike that. I'd like to go to what else we did when we were down at the firing range in the Dearborn Heights Police Department. Did you, I think you've testified that you've test fired that weapon down there.
Yes, I did. I fired it 4 times.
All right. Can you explain to the judge what you did down there?
Well, Your Honor, I first looked at the screen to ascertain what type of damage was done to the screen. I've already looked at the photographs of the victim at autopsy to determine as best I could the type of wound available that was delivered by this particular
Sorry, I projected.
shotgun
I just heard
wound.
that he said that he relied on a picture taken of the victim at autopsy. Is that what I just heard?
Yes.
Okay, then I project because there has not been a single photograph of the victim admitted during the autopsy for this court, in front of this court.
Your Honor, Mr. Balish, is there anything else when to determine the distance, the firing?
Yes, and shotguns are somewhat different in the way they're given a distance determination than handguns or rifles. And just to briefly explain, in a handgun or or a rifle, you're normally going to have a single projectile that's coming out of the barrel, and then you're going to have a quantity of gunpowder that comes out after it. The closer you are to the muzzle of the firearm, the more gunpowder is going to be deposited on the surface of the person. So if a person is 1 foot away, they're going to be heavily contaminated with gunpowder residue, whether it's a rifle or pistol or a revolver. However, with a shotgun, you're dealing with a much different product because it's such a large caliber. It's a 12 gauge is approximately .729 inches in diameter at the muzzle, much larger than any of the other firearms that are available, say for 10 gauge or larger. And out of this comes a multitude of projectiles, and a lot of times they're filled with a buffering agent. And eventually, after the wads come out, then comes the firearm's residue. In determining distance from shotguns, it is by far the more accurate way to do it is the penetration, the shape of the wound itself, the damage done to the circular or the skin around the area, where the wads are, what you find there, and the buffering material. And in this case, there was an abundance of evidence on this case indicating this was an exceptionally close-range firing.
Why do you say that? And what do you mean by exceptionally close-range firing? How many feet?
In my opinion, the muzzle of this shotgun was less than 2 feet from the face of the victim at the point in time of discharge. That's very close. There's no other way to say it's not a close-range shooting. The fact that all the wadding from this shot shell was in the wound cavity itself would tell, it should have told the investigators or the medical examiner, wadding doesn't fly very far accurately after it leaves the muzzle of the shotgun. So the fact that that was all in the wound canal should have told them this was very close shooting. The fact, or what should have been done in the reconstruction, and may I go back to this photograph if we're asking about that.
Yeah, and you're talking about the medical examiner's
This
report.
photograph indicates that this was the damage from the shotgun, and that is incorrect.
Why do you say that?
This is damage done to the face of the victim, and it's done by pressure, but the large portion that goes up from about here up to the eyebrow of the victim is a tear, and it wasn't caused by the shotgun, it's caused by the pressure, but it's a splitting of the skin. The actual hole of the shotgun is much smaller if they would have taken the effort to put that back together.
And how do you put the wound back together?
I'm sorry, what is he basing that opinion on? Because you can't get that from that picture. So again, he's relying on facts, not on evidence.
What are you relying on, sir?
The photographs I saw, the autopsy of the victim, Your Honor.
Mr. Balish and I can recall the medical examiner to get those admitted, but I can rely just on the shaded portion there about the wound and then the tearing.
I'm sorry, I don't believe that you can, because that diagram does not differentiate between where the exit or where the entrance wound is in terms of the damage, in terms of tearing and things of that nature. So I don't know how she intends to rely on something that doesn't even depict what she indicates it depicts.
Your Honor, may I ask the witness a different question? Let me ask this. All right. Let's say, have you had a chance in your experience to look at gunshot wounds?
Hundreds of them.
Okay. Have you ever been present during an autopsy?
Hundreds of them.
All right. And what is the best method, if you have a shotgun wound, what should the medical examiner do to determine where the entrance wound is?
Judge, I have to object at this point. She's asking him questions about something that's outside the scope of what you qualified him for. She's asking him to now testify as a medical examiner or as a forensic pathologist. He's only been qualified as a forensic expert in terms of his firearms, comparison and ballistics and tool marks, as well as crime scene reconstruction. She's asking him now questions about an autopsy, and that's outside the scope of what he's been qualified.
Ms. Garland?
Your Honor, I do believe this could fall under both expertise. He has to do this with the course of his training. If Your Honor wishes me to qualify him as an expert in medical examinations or reconstruction, because it is a reconstruction, crime scene reconstruction, just with the body instead of the other evidence?
No, I think I want to sustain that objection.
All right. Do you know, through your being a firearms examiner or through crime scene reconstruction, one of those expertise, do you know the best way? Do you learn what a gunshot wound looks like on a decedent?
Object, what's the relevance of a gunshot wound? We're here for a shotgun.
Excuse me, a shotgun wound.
The fact you're differentiating between a shotgun and a gunshot is not a differentiable. They're both gunshot wounds or holes. The basis that I would probably offer to you is that if an unknown individual were to commit suicide with a shotgun, and many people have done this, and it's in the literature, and I've seen these multiple times, unfortunately, by placing the shotgun under the chin area, the entire top of the head usually is removed. That isn't caused by the shotgun pellets or the projectile that's within the shotgun. It's caused by the gases that are coming out of the shotgun. They're not caused by the projectile. And if you go back to look at it, the wound, you can actually reconstruct and see how that was the initial wound of entrance.
Okay.
That's sort of what I was trying to get to on the original.
Okay, and is that something you learned through your training as a firearms examiner or through your training being present in autopsies?
Well, in my training, when you worked on a crime scene, you not only went to the crime scene, you also attended and participated at the autopsy of that particular crime scene. That's why I've gone to so many autopsies in my career. And it was not unusual to work hand in hand, and especially when you're trying to figure out distance or determination of the wound. And it was not unusual to be called back to the morgue by the medical examiners to ask my opinion as to what I thought was the bullet entrance and bullet exit from the medical examiner's office.
So through your expertise as a firearm examiner, you learned this information?
Correct.
Okay, Your Honor.
And I can't stress it enough. It's the experience of having done it in actual scenes that is the most important.
Okay. Your Honor, I would still like to ask my witness about reconstructing a gunshot wound on a decedent and the best way to do it. Because I believe he just testified he's learned that through his experience as a firearms examiner, and that's what he's qualified as.
Based upon what he said, no, I will allow it.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Balish, let's go back to reconstructing a gunshot wound. Shotgun. We're just going to use the same word, gunshot wound, and it'll mean shotgun and
Right.
handgun. There's no difference in your mind?
No, they're both firearms wounds. One is from a shotgun, one a handgun or a rifle. They are different. They're distinctively different, all three of them actually. But as I told you before, the main differentiation when you're looking at a shotgun with a multiple projectile load is how it enters the skin and how the pattern appears initially. Not what happens after to the victim, but it's what happens initially at the point of entry that would give you muzzle to target distance.
How do you determine what it looked like as it entered a person's body?
Well, if it's as the deceased was in this particular case, you would physically try and place the skin back in its original position.
Okay, and do you do that with stitching, or can you just manually put the skin back?
Normally you can manually put it, it is, not meaning any disrespect, but it is a cadaver at that point in time, and you're trying to manipulate and get it back, the skin, and you're trying to close the ripping and tearing of the tissue and putting it back to its, close to its original position so you can ascertain what the size of the actual entry hole was.
Okay. Were you able to ascertain that from any of the medical examiner's documents that you received and reviewed?
I have to object because there were only certain things that were admitted in terms of the medical examiner's report and his sketch that I don't know if that's what he's relying on or if he got more than that.
We're going to have to have him elaborate a little bit on what he's relying on his testimony on. I would agree with that.
Okay. Are you relying this testimony on the documents you have there from the medical examiner?
The documents and the 2 photographs taken of the victim's face at the medical examiner's office, one with I believe it has a measure in it, and the other one does not, but those are the main ones for that basis.
Who would object to any conclusion he makes upon that basis, because it's facts, not evidence.
Okay, Your Honor, I will move along. Were you able to, you said you test fired the gun. Did you bring the cutouts that you fired?
I did.
Okay, and would that be of relevance for the judge to see how you determined the range of fire?
I believe it would.
Okay. Do you have those with you?
I do with me. They're here.
Okay.
One rubber band. Yeah. It's every other one, so you understand that.
Can I have a minute to look at these?
Yes, you can.
And can I go in there?
Well,
Where can I go?
you can go in there, I guess. I guess. Well, we'll take 5 minutes. Do you have any comments? I understand. Get close. Talking. Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, 5 minutes, please. So the prosecutors can go over some more evidence.